I want to now move to more practical questions. The more practical question of how we can involve men in violence prevention. We must address men, and there are 3 reasons why we must address men to stop violence against women. First, because it is largely men who perpetrate that violence. Most men are not violent. That's the good news. Most men are not violent. But when a girl or a woman is subject to violence, the perpetrator is very likely to be male. This means that men in general must take responsibility for ending physical and sexual assault. Second, we know that masculinity plays a crucial role in shaping violence against women. At the individual level, men are more likely to be violent against women if they have hostile and sexist attitudes towards women, if they identify with traditional images of masculinity and male privilege. At the social level, the macro social level, rates of violence against women are higher in cultures where manhood is defined in terms of being strong, being tough, in terms of having an entitlement to power, where there are rigid gender roles, and so on. So these first 2 reasons mean we have no choice. We have no choice but to address men and masculinity to stop violence against women. But there is a third reason, and it is a more positive, a more optimistic reason. We must recognise that violence is an issue that concerns women and concerns men, and that men have a personal stake, a personal benefit from ending violence against women. Now, feminists who've worked on the issue of violence against women have always hoped that men could play a positive role in this work. At the same time, some feminist women are nervous or afraid about involving men in this work, for good reasons, I think, for understandable reasons. This is a delicate politics. We have to do this carefully and delicately. But we must include strategies aimed at men, aimed at masculinities, if we are to be successful in stopping violence against women. Next slide, please. So what is it we're trying to do? Violence prevention means stopping men from using violence in the first place, stopping men from using violence. We must challenge the beliefs and values which support violence. We must challenge the power relations, the inequalities which sustain violence and are sustained by violence. And we must promote alternative constructions of masculinity and gender and identity based on non-violence, based on gender inequality. So this answers the question, why should we involve men? What about the next question? How should we involve men? Can I get the next slide, please? Next slide, please. There are 3 principles that should guide our work with men. And this is true whether you are an activist or an educator or a politician in the government, whoever you are. First, we must be pro-feminist, feminist or pro-feminist. We must be guided by principles of gender equality and social justice. We must be critical of those aspects of boys' behaviour and men's behaviour which are harmful to girls and harmful to women. We must encourage men to develop respectful and egalitarian relations with women. We must frame male involvement within a clear feminist political agenda. We should do this work in partnership with, in alliance with women's groups, women and women's groups. And we must protect women's space and women-only funding. We must not take funding and resources from women and women's programs. Second, we must be male positive. We must be optimistic about boys and men, and we must support boys and men's efforts at positive change. We should recognise that some forms of masculinity are positive, have positive elements to them. We must be committed to enhancing, improving boys' and men's lives. Third, we must acknowledge diversities. The fact that boys' and men's lives have similarities, but also diversities. That being a man is shaped by gender, but also by class and race and ethnicity and age and so on. And that men share very unequally in male privilege. Some men have important access to male privilege. Other men, because of other social locations, have less access to male privilege. All of us have multiple identities, and multiple social locations, and we must acknowledge our roles in domination and our roles in subordination. Next slide, please. So, moving to a more practical issue, how do we involve and engage men? First, how do we actually reach boys and men? There are two strategies for reaching boys and men: go to them or bring them to you. Strategies for going to boys and men include peer education, going to the workplaces or the sporting events or entertainment events where men congregate, where men gather, using community outreach strategies to go to where young and adult men are. The other strategy is to bring boys and men to us. For example, we can make our services, make our community services and our programs male-friendly so that they're more attractive to boys and men. Second, there is the issue of what kind of message should we give to boys and men? It works best if we begin with the positive, begin with what is working. For example, begin with the point that most men do not use violence, that most men treat women and girls with respect. If we focus on the negative, if we begin with the negative, we're likely to make men shut down, to make men hostile and defensive. This does not mean, of course, that we should condone men's violence or men's sexism. We must have that fundamental commitment to gender equality, that fundamental feminist orientation, as I've said. Second, we must speak to men's experience. We must base the language and the content of our programs and our work in men's own experience. So, for example, I have tried to argue in my work, in my speaking and writing, that violence against women is a men's issue. I've tried to say to other men that violence against women is a men's issue because often it's our wives, our daughters, our sisters, our friends whose lives are damaged